3 in the morning has a weight to it, a stillness that presses down on everything like water, making even the smallest sounds feel enormous. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant whisper of traffic on the street below, my own heartbeat, which seems impossibly loud in the darkness of my bedroom. I am staring at the ceiling, tracing the faint crack that runs from the corner near the window to somewhere above my dresser. I have memorized this crack over the past 2 years, the way it branches and spreads like a river delta, but tonight it looks different. Tonight, everything looks different. He is only 15 feet away from me. On my couch, under the gray wool blanket I pulled from the linen closet, Rowan Hale lies curled on his side, breathing in a rhythm that tells me he is not really asleep. The rise and fall of his shoulders is too careful, too measured. Even in the supposed safety of unconsciousness, he is holding something back. Don't leave me alone tonight. The words loop through my mind like a song I cannot stop humming. 5 simple words that have upended everything I thought I understood about us, about him, about the careful distance I have spent years maintaining. They were spoken so quietly, I almost convinced myself I had imagined them. But the way his voice cracked on the word alone, the way his eyes searched my face in the dim light from the hallway, that was real. That was desperately, achingly real. I close my eyes and try to will myself toward sleep, but my mind keeps returning to the moment he appeared at my door. It was just past 11, late enough that the knock startled me from the novel I was pretending to read. I had been sitting in my armchair, the same navy blue chair I bought when I first moved into this apartment, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once. The knock was soft but insistent, the kind that says I know you are awake even if you wish you weren't. When I opened the door, Rowan was standing in the hallway with a black duffel bag slung over his shoulder and an expression I had never seen before. His usual confidence, that easy swagger that carried him through every room like he owned it, was gone. In its place was something raw and unguarded. His dark hair, always perfectly tousled, looked like he had been running his hands through it for hours. His eyes, those pale green eyes that had been making me lose my train of thought since college, were rimmed with red. "Can I crash here tonight?" he said, not quite meeting my gaze. The question hung between us like smoke. "Of course," I told him, stepping aside to let him in. The words came automatically, the way they always did with Rowan. He had crashed on my couch before, though not often, and never like this. Never with that particular quality of desperation threading through his voice. He dropped the bag by the door and stood in my living room as if he had never seen it before. My apartment is small and deliberately sparse. White walls, dark wood floors, a few carefully chosen pieces of furniture arranged with mathematical precision. It is a space designed for one person, for quiet, for control. Rowan has always seemed too large for it, too vibrant. But tonight he looked diminished somehow, like he was trying to fold himself into something smaller. I asked if he wanted coffee or tea or something stronger. He shook his head and moved to the couch, sinking into it with the heavy grace of someone carrying an invisible weight. I remained standing, unsure of the protocol for this version of him. This subdued and fragile Rowan who bore little resemblance to the friend who usually filled my space with laughter and stories about his latest romantic adventures. We sat in silence for a while, him on the couch, me in my chair, the television playing some late-night talk show neither of us was watching. The host was making jokes that fell flat in the strange atmosphere of my living room. Rowan stared at his hands, fingers interlaced, and I found myself studying the line of his profile in the blue glow of the screen. The sharp angle of his jaw, the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheekbones, details I had trained myself not to notice but could never quite forget. Around midnight, I stood and announced I was going to bed. It seemed like the safe thing to do, the normal thing. He could sleep on the couch as he had before, and in the morning we would pretend this strange tension between us was nothing more than late-night fatigue and whatever crisis had driven him to my door. But as I reached the threshold of my bedroom, his voice stopped me. "Elias," he said, and there was something in the way he spoke my name that made me turn around. "Don't leave me alone tonight." He was looking at me then, really looking, and I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tighten. It was not fear exactly, though there was an element of that. It was more like recognition, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time, or perhaps allowing himself to see me clearly for the first time. The way he said it, soft and broken and almost too quiet to hear, It did not sound like he was asking me to stay in the living room. It sounded like he was asking me to stay with him, to be present in whatever moment this was, to not retreat behind the careful walls I had built to protect us both. I found myself walking back to the couch without making a conscious decision to do so. I sat on the edge, close enough that I could smell his cologne, that familiar scent of cedar and something darker that I had been cataloging without meaning to for years. He shifted slightly, making room for me, and for a moment we just sat there in the dim light from the hallway, two men on a couch in the middle of the night, everything and nothing between us. "What happened?" I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know the answer. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not respond. Then he said, "I don't know. I don't know what happened. I just know I couldn't be anywhere else tonight." The honesty in his voice was devastating. Rowan has always been good with words, charming and quick, and able to talk his way into or out of almost anything. But this was different. This was him without his armor, without the easy smile and the practiced jokes that kept the world at arm's length. I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to understand what had brought him here, what had put that lost look in his eyes, what had happened to the girlfriend he had been dating for the past few months. But something about the way he was holding himself, like he might shatter if pressed too hard, made me hold back. Instead, I stayed where I was, close enough to offer comfort without demanding explanations. Eventually, he lay down, pulling the blanket up to his chin, and I moved to the armchair. But even from across the room, I could feel the weight of his presence, the way his breathing gradually slowed as he drifted towards something that might have been sleep. I should have gone to my own bed then, should have given him the space and privacy he needed. But something kept me anchored in that chair, watching over him in the darkness like a guardian he had never asked for. Now, hours later, I am still awake, still thinking about those 5 words and what they might mean. Don't leave me alone tonight. They feel like a door opening, or perhaps like a wall coming down. Either way, I sense that something fundamental has shifted between us, something that cannot be undone or ignored or explained away in the harsh light of morning. I have spent years perfecting the art of loving Rowan from a safe distance. I have made peace with the fact that he is straight, that he moves through the world collecting hearts without meaning to, that our friendship exists in a space carefully separate from the part of me that dreams about what it might be like to touch him, to be touched by him, to matter to him in the way he has always mattered to me. But tonight feels different. Tonight, the careful boundaries I have constructed seem as fragile as tissue paper. Tonight, he asked me not to leave him alone, and the way he said it made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, the distance I have been maintaining has been protecting him as much as it has been protecting me. I turn onto my side, facing the wall, and try to quiet the voice in my head that is whispering dangerous possibilities. Tomorrow he will probably thank me for letting him stay, gather his things, and return to his regular life. He will go back to being the Rowan I have always known, confident and untouchable, and I will go back to being the friend who watches from the sidelines and pretends that is enough. But for now, in the wait of 3 in the morning, with him breathing unevenly on my couch and the city sleeping around us, I allow myself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, everything is about to change. I have always been a creature of routine. Every morning at 6:30, the alarm sounds, and I rise without hesitation. Coffee first, black, in the same white ceramic mug I bought 3 years ago when I decided to replace all my mismatched dishes with something deliberate and clean. Then breakfast, usually toast with jam or scrambled eggs if I am feeling ambitious. Shower at 7:15. Dressed and out the door by 8, walking the same 4 blocks to the accounting firm where I have worked for the past 6 years. My life moves in predictable patterns, and I have made peace with this predictability. There is comfort in knowing what comes next, in controlling the variables, in creating a space where nothing unexpected can touch me. My apartment reflects this philosophy. Minimalist furniture arranged with careful precision. Books organized by author and genre. A kitchen where every utensil has its designated drawer, every plate its designated shelf. It is a life designed for one person, built around the assumption that solitude is safer than the chaos other people bring. And for the most part, it has worked. I wake up knowing what my day will look like. I go to sleep knowing that tomorrow will follow the same gentle rhythm. There are no surprises, no emotional landmines, no moments that threaten to upend the careful order I have constructed. Except for Rowan. Rowan Hale has been the one beautiful disruption in my ordered existence since we met 12 years ago in Professor Martinez's advanced statistics course. I was sitting in the front row, as always, taking meticulous notes in my careful handwriting. He arrived 15 minutes late, sliding into the seat beside me with an easy smile and a muttered apology that somehow managed to charm our notoriously stern professor into forgiveness. We should not have become friends. Everything about us was mismatched. I was quiet where he was loud, careful where he was impulsive, contained where he was expansive. I studied in the library until it closed. He learned by talking through problems with whoever would listen. I planned my schedule weeks in advance. He lived moment to moment, trusting that things would work out because they always seemed to for him. But somehow, in that unlikely pairing, we found something that clicked. He needed my steadiness. I was drawn to his light. He would show up at my dorm room with takeout from whatever restaurant had caught his attention that day, spreading the containers across my desk while he told me about his latest adventure or heartbreak or brilliant idea. I would listen, ask the right questions, offer the kind of practical advice he never seemed to need but always appreciated hearing. Even then, I knew there was something more than friendship in the way I looked forward to his visits, the way my pulse quickened when he knocked on my door. But I also knew, with the certainty that comes from careful observation, that Rowan moved through the world collecting admirers of all kinds and leaving most of them behind with careless grace. He dated frequently and casually, mostly women, though I had seen him flirt with men at parties with the same easy charm he brought to everything else. He was beautiful in the way that made people want to orbit around him, and I learned early that wanting Rowan Hale was a common affliction with no known cure. So I did what I always do when faced with something beyond my control. I compartmentalized. I built walls. I told myself that friendship was enough, that it was better to have him in my life as a friend than to risk losing him by wanting more. I became very good at loving him from a safe distance, at enjoying his presence without expecting it to mean anything beyond what it was. After graduation, we stayed in touch despite living in different cities for several years. He would call at random hours with stories about his job in marketing, his latest relationship, the city he was thinking of moving to next. I would tell him about my work, my quiet routines, the books I was reading. Our friendship became something sustained by distance and the kind of deep affection that does not require constant maintenance. 3 years ago, when he moved back to the city and we began seeing each other regularly again, I had to relearn the discipline of keeping my feelings in check. He would show up at my apartment with wine and stories, sprawling across my couch like he owned the place, and I would have to remind myself that this was just Rowan being Rowan. The way he looked at me when he thought I was not paying attention, the way he seemed to gravitate toward my space when he needed to think through a problem, the way he sometimes grew quiet and thoughtful in my presence. These were not signs of anything deeper. They were simply the way Rowan interacted with someone he trusted. But lately, something has been different. Over the past few months, I have noticed changes in him that I cannot explain away as easily. The easy laugh that used to punctuate every conversation has become less frequent. The stories about his romantic adventures have tapered off, replaced by longer silences and a distracted quality that seems unlike him. When he looks at me now, there is something searching in his expression, as if he is trying to solve a puzzle he cannot quite name. I have noticed, but I have not asked. Asking would require acknowledging that I pay attention to these details, that I catalog the shifts in his mood and behavior with the careful attention of someone who cares too much. It would mean admitting that I have been watching him, studying him, hoping to understand what has put that new weight in his shoulders, that new uncertainty in his eyes. So I have stayed silent, offered my presence without demanding explanations, maintained the careful balance that has allowed our friendship to survive all these years. I have told myself that whatever is happening with Rowan, it will resolve itself the way things always do for him. He will find his footing again, rediscover that easy confidence that has always been his trademark, and our friendship will return to its familiar rhythm. But now he is sleeping on my couch after whispering words that sounded like a confession, and I am beginning to understand that some changes cannot be ignored or explained away. Some disruptions are too profound to be absorbed into the careful order of a life built for one person. The knock came at 11:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I had been checking my phone obsessively, The way you do when you are pretending to read, but actually thinking about someone who has not texted you back in 3 days. The novel in my lap, something literary and dense that I had picked up because the reviews promised it would demand my full attention, had become mere decoration. My mind kept wandering to Rowan, to the brief message he had sent on Saturday that simply said having a weird week, talk soon, and then nothing. 3 days of silence was unusual for us. Even when we went weeks without seeing each other, there was usually a steady current of communication. Random photos of things that reminded him of me, links to articles he thought I might find interesting, complaints about his coworkers, or questions about mundane things he could have easily Googled himself. The absence of his voice, even in text form, had left a strange hollowness in my routine. So when the soft knock interrupted the quiet of my apartment, my heart jumped with a mixture of relief and apprehension. I knew, somehow, that it would be him. The tentative quality of the sound, neither urgent nor casual, carried something distinctly Rowan-like in its uncertainty. But when I opened the door, the person standing in my hallway was not the Rowan I was expecting. This version of him looked like he had been carrying something heavy for days. His usual posture, straight-backed and confident, had collapsed inward. The black duffel bag hanging from his shoulder seemed to weigh more than it should, pulling him slightly to one side. His dark hair, which he usually wore in the kind of effortless style that suggested he had just run his fingers through it once and somehow achieved perfection, looked genuinely disheveled. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. Those pale green eyes that normally held a kind of perpetual amusement, as if he knew something the rest of us had not figured out yet, were rimmed with red and looked older somehow, like he had aged months in the span of days. "Can I crash here tonight?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no preamble, no explanation, no attempt at the kind of casual banter that usually preceded his requests for favors. Just those 6 words delivered with a fragility that made something in my chest tighten. "Of course," I said, stepping aside immediately. The response was automatic, trained by years of being his safe harbor whenever life became too complicated or overwhelming. But even as I spoke, I was cataloging the details that seemed wrong. The way he would not meet my eyes, the careful way he moved, as if sudden motions might cause him to break apart, the absence of his signature half-smile that usually accompanied even his most serious moments. He dropped the bag just inside the door with a soft thud and stood in my living room as if seeing it for the first time. My space, which had always seemed to shrink pleasantly around his presence, now felt too large, too quiet, inadequate somehow for whatever he was carrying. He looked around at the familiar furniture, the carefully arranged books, the minimalist aesthetic I had cultivated over years of living alone, and something in his expression suggested he was searching for something he could not name. I asked if he wanted coffee, tea, a drink, something to eat. The host in me, trained by a childhood of watching my mother offer comfort through small domestic gestures, scrambled to find the right combination of care and normalcy. But he shook his head to each suggestion, moving instead to the couch where he had sat hundreds of times before, during movie nights and lazy Sunday afternoons and late-night conversations that stretched until dawn. This time, though, he sank into the cushions with the heavy grace of someone whose body could no longer support the weight of whatever was happening in his mind. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. I remained standing, uncertain of the geography of this new version of our friendship, unsure whether the usual rules applied. We had been through difficult periods before. I had seen him heartbroken over relationships that ended badly, frustrated with jobs that did not challenge him, angry about family dynamics that never seemed to resolve. But he had always retained some essential Rowan-ness through those struggles, some core of optimism or resilience that carried him through until the next good thing came along. This felt different. This felt like something fundamental had shifted, like he was questioning things he had never thought to question before. The television was on, some late-night talk show playing at low volume, but neither of us was watching. The host was interviewing someone I did not recognize about a movie I had not heard of, their laughter bright and hollow in the strange atmosphere that had settled over my living room. Rowan stared at his hands, occasionally shifting position but never relaxing, never settling into the comfortable sprawl that usually characterized his presence in my space. I wanted to ask what had happened. The words formed themselves in my throat multiple times, but something about the quality of his silence warned me away from direct questions. Instead, I moved to my armchair, the same navy blue chair that had become my designated spot during all our years of friendship, and tried to offer the kind of quiet companionship that had always been my specialty. Around midnight, exhaustion began to creep into my bones. The day had been long, full of spreadsheets and client meetings and the usual administrative tedium that filled my working hours. My body was ready for sleep, ready to retreat to the familiar sanctuary of my bedroom, where I could process this strange evening in solitude. I stood, stretching slightly, and announced that I was going to bed. The words felt normal, routine, the kind of thing I had said countless times when Rowan had stayed over before. He knew where the extra blankets were, knew that he was welcome to whatever he could find in the kitchen, knew that my home was his whenever he needed it. But as I reached the threshold of my bedroom, his voice stopped me with a gravity that made the air in my lungs feel thick. "Elias," he said, and something in the way he spoke my name made me turn around slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile moment we had stumbled into. He was looking at me then, really looking, in a way that made me feel exposed and seen and terrified all at once. His eyes held something I had never seen there before, something raw and unguarded that made my heart beat faster for reasons I did not want to examine. "Don't leave me alone tonight." What I expected to be one night became two, then three, then something that felt less like temporary shelter and more like a quiet revolution in the carefully ordered landscape of my life. Rowan's black duffel bag remained by the door, unzipped but never fully unpacked, as if he was holding on to the possibility of leaving even as he settled deeper into the rhythms of my apartment. I told myself I was not keeping track of the days, but I was. Thursday morning, I made coffee for two without thinking about it. Friday evening, I found myself buying groceries with him in mind, adding the kind of cereal he liked and the specific brand of orange juice he preferred. By Saturday, when I caught myself rearranging my weekend plans to accommodate his presence, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in the architecture of my solitude. He was different during the daylight hours. The raw vulnerability he had shown that first night retreated behind a version of his usual self, though muted, like someone had turned down the brightness on his personality. He would emerge from the couch in the mornings with his hair sticking up at odd angles, offering a small smile that carried echoes of his former charm but lacked its usual confidence. We would move around each other in the kitchen with careful politeness, sharing space that had been designed for one person with the awkward grace of dancers learning new choreography. But as the days accumulated, the careful distance between us began to collapse in small, almost imperceptible ways. The first time his hand brushed mine as we both reached for the same coffee mug, I pulled back with the speed of someone touching a hot stove. But he did not pull back. He let his fingers linger against mine for just a moment longer than accident would explain, long enough for me to feel the warmth of his skin and the slight tremor that seemed to live just beneath his surface now. It became a pattern, these brief moments of contact that felt both accidental and inevitable. His shoulder pressing against mine as we sat on the couch watching television. His knee touching my leg when he shifted position. The way he would reach across me to grab the remote. His body close enough that I could smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something else, something that might have been fear or longing or both. I found myself cataloging these moments with the obsessive attention of a scientist documenting a new species. The way his breathing changed when we sat close together. The way his eyes would find mine across the room and hold my gaze for beats too long to be casual. The way he had started saying my name more often, as if testing how it felt in his mouth, as if my name had become something precious that he needed to hold on to. By the third night, the pretense that this was temporary had worn thin. We were both aware that he could go back to his own apartment whenever he chose, that whatever crisis had driven him to my door was not the kind that required extended sanctuary. But neither of us mentioned it. Instead, we fell into patterns that felt dangerously close to domestic routine. He would read while I worked on my laptop, the quiet rustle of pages turning becoming a soundtrack to my evening. I would cook dinner for two, and he would clear the table afterward, our movements around each other growing more natural, less self-conscious. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as we sat watching some forgettable movie with the sound turned low, that I noticed he was not really watching at all. He was studying me instead, his gaze tracking the line of my profile with an intensity that made my skin feel warm and exposed. When I turned to meet his eyes, he did not look away as he usually would. Instead, he held my gaze with something that looked almost like recognition, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time. The space between us on the couch had been shrinking incrementally over the course of the evening. What had started as careful separation had closed to mere inches, our bodies angled toward each other in unconscious choreography. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath, could count the faint freckles scattered across the bridge of his nose that I had memorized years ago, but never allowed myself to study this closely. When he shifted closer, closing the last few inches between us so that our thighs pressed together along their entire length, I felt something like electricity shoot through my nervous system. It was not an accident this time. There was nothing casual or incidental about the way he positioned himself against me, nothing that could be explained away by the limited space on my couch or the distraction of the movie playing on the television. He did not move away, and neither did I. We sat there in the blue glow of the screen, our bodies touching from hip to knee, breathing in sync, existing in a moment that felt both eternal and impossibly fragile. I was acutely aware of every point of contact between us, of the way his warmth seemed to seep through the fabric of our clothes, of how right it felt to have him this close despite every rational thought in my head screaming warnings about boundaries and consequences and the careful friendship we had built over more than a decade. The silence between us was no longer the comfortable quiet of old friends sharing space. It had become something charged and expectant, heavy with unspoken questions and possibilities that neither of us seemed brave enough to voice. I could feel my heart beating so hard I was certain he must be able to hear it, could feel the blood rushing through my veins with the intensity that made me dizzy. When I finally risked a glance at his face, I found him already looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. His usual guardedness had fallen away completely, leaving something raw and honest and terrifying in its vulnerability. There was a question in his eyes, tentative and hopeful and afraid all at once, and I realized with a clarity that felt like falling that he was waiting for some kind of permission, some signal that it would be safe to cross whatever line we had been dancing around for days. On the fourth night, I could no longer pretend that the question burning in my chest was not affecting every breath I took, every glance I stole when I thought he was not looking, every careful word I chose in our conversations that had become increasingly weighted with things we were not saying. We were sitting on the couch again, the television playing something neither of us was watching, our bodies maintaining that same electric proximity that had become our new normal. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the air between us seemed to vibrate with an urgency that had been building for days, and I could see in the tension of his shoulders, in the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching in his lap, that he was carrying something he could no longer hold alone. "Rowan," I said, and his name felt different in my mouth than it ever had before, heavier somehow, loaded with all the care and confusion and desperate hope I had been trying to contain. "What happened?" The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we were brave enough to cross. For a moment, I thought he might deflect the way he always did when conversations threatened to venture into territory that felt too real, too vulnerable. But instead, he turned to face me fully, his knee pressing against my thigh, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my heart race. He stared at his hands for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, his breathing careful and controlled in the way that suggested he was trying not to fall apart. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet I had to lean closer to hear him, close enough that I could see the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheekbones in the dim light from the television. "I broke up with Sarah," he said, referring to the woman he had been dating for the past few months, the marketing coordinator with the infectious laugh whom I had met twice and liked despite myself. "But that was weeks ago. That's not why I'm here." He paused, running his hands through his hair in the gesture I had seen him make countless times over the years when he was struggling to find the right words. But this time, there was something different about it, something that looked less like frustration and more like someone trying to hold himself together through sheer force of will. "I've been feeling empty," he continued, his voice growing even quieter. Like something cracked inside me, and I don't know how to fix it. Like I've been living my life wrong somehow, making choices that felt right at the time, but never actually made me happy. Like I've been pretending to be someone I'm not for so long that I forgot who I actually am. The words hit me like a physical force, not because they were unexpected, but because they echoed something I had sensed in him for months, a restlessness that seemed to have no clear source, a dissatisfaction that went deeper than job stress or relationship troubles. I wanted to reach for him then, to offer some kind of physical comfort, but I kept my hands still, afraid that any movement might cause him to retreat back into the safer territory of casual conversation. "The only time I feel like myself anymore is when I'm with you," he said, and the honesty in his voice was devastating. "You're the only person I feel safe with. The only person who doesn't expect me to be charming or funny or confident all the time. The only person who lets me just be quiet when I need to be quiet." He looked up at me then, and I saw tears gathering in the corners of his eyes, threatening to spill over. The sight of Rowan Hale, who had always seemed invincible in his easy confidence, on the verge of crying in my living room, was almost more than I could bear. "I don't know what's wrong with me," he whispered. "I don't know why I can't figure out how to be happy. I don't know why every relationship I've ever had has felt like wearing clothes that don't fit right. I don't know why the only place I want to be is here, with you, in this quiet apartment where nothing is expected of me except to exist." The confession hung between us like something sacred and fragile, and I realized that he was offering me a piece of himself that he had never shown anyone else. A vulnerability so complete it made my chest ache with the weight of it. This was not the smooth, charismatic Rowan who moved through the world collecting admirers and opportunities. This was someone lost and searching and brave enough to admit he did not have all the answers. "Can I stay?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly on the words. "With you. For real. Not just until I figure out what's wrong with me, but because being here feels like the first honest thing I've done in years." The question was simple on its surface, but I could hear all the layers beneath it. He was asking for sanctuary, yes, but he was also asking for something deeper. He was asking me to see him without his armor, to accept the confused and frightened person he was beneath the charming exterior, to believe that whatever was broken in him was worth the patience it would take to heal. I thought about all the years I had spent loving him from a careful distance, all the nights I had lain awake wondering what it would be like to matter to him the way he mattered to me, all the times I had convinced myself that friendship was enough because the alternative seemed impossible. Now he was asking me to step into that impossibility, to trust that what I felt for him might be something he could learn to feel in return. I did not answer with words. Instead, I reached across the small space between us and placed my hand over his where it rested on his knee, my palm covering his knuckles, my fingers curling around his wrist. His skin was warm and slightly damp with nervousness, and I could feel his pulse beating fast and unsteady beneath my thumb. He looked down at our joined hands with an expression of wonder, as if he had never seen anything quite like it before. Then his fingers turned beneath mine, palm to palm, and he gripped my hand with a desperation that spoke of someone who had been drowning and had finally found something solid to hold on to. His eyes closed, and for a moment he just breathed, deep and shaky, as though he was finally allowing himself to exhale a breath he had been holding for months or maybe years. I did not sleep that night. How could I, when everything I thought I understood about my life had shifted so fundamentally that I felt like I was inhabiting someone else's story? Rowan's hand had eventually relaxed in mine as exhaustion overtook him, but I had continued to hold it long after his breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep, afraid that letting go would somehow undo the fragile honesty we had finally found. Now, in the gray pre-dawn light filtering through my bedroom window, I lay staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened. The words kept replaying in my mind with the insistence of a song I could not stop humming. "You're the only person I feel safe with. Can I stay with you? For real." As if everything that had come before had been performance, as if the easy friendship we had maintained for over a decade had been just a prelude to this moment of actual truth. The possibility both thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. I had spent so many years convinced that loving Rowan was something I would have to do in secret, something that existed in the spaces between his words, in the careful distance I maintained to protect both of us from the complications my feelings might create. I had made peace with being the friend who was always available but never demanding, who offered support without expecting reciprocation, who loved him quietly and completely while pretending that friendship was enough. But now he was asking me to step out of that familiar role and into something uncharted and dangerous. He was asking me to believe that what I felt for him might be something he could learn to return, that the connection between us was strong enough to support the weight of honest need and mutual vulnerability. The rational part of my mind, the part that had kept me safe all these years, whispered warnings about the risks involved. What if this was just a moment of crisis-induced confusion? What if he was mistaking emotional dependence for something deeper? What if letting him stay meant watching him eventually realize that what he needed was not me specifically, but simply the comfort of unconditional acceptance, something he could find elsewhere once he regained his footing? But there was another voice in my head, quieter but more insistent, that asked different questions. What if this was the beginning of something I had never dared to hope for? What if the careful walls I had built to protect our friendship had also been preventing it from becoming something more honest, more complete? What if the love I had been hiding was exactly what he needed, and what he was offering in return was worth the risk of losing everything I thought I wanted to preserve? By the time I heard him stirring in the living room, I had made my decision. Or perhaps the decision had made itself, emerging from some deep place in my chest that had been waiting years for permission to hope. I found him in the kitchen, standing at the counter with his back to me, making coffee with the careful movements of someone trying not to wake a sleeping household. His hair was sticking up at odd angles, and he was wearing the same clothes he had slept in, but there was something different about the set of his shoulders, something that looked almost like relief. "Good morning," I said, and he turned to face me with a smile that was small but genuine, the first real smile I had seen from him since he arrived at my door 4 nights ago. "Good morning," he replied, and there was something shy in his voice, as if he was not sure what version of himself he was supposed to be now that we had crossed whatever line we had crossed the night before. We moved around each other in the kitchen with the same careful choreography we had developed over the past few days, but now it felt different, charged with new meaning. When he handed me my coffee mug, our fingers brushed and neither of us pulled away. When I reached around him to get the sugar, he did not step aside to give me more room. We were both aware that something needed to be acknowledged. Some conversation needed to happen about what his staying meant and what we were willing to risk to find out. But there was also a fragile peace in the quiet of the morning, in the simple domestic ritual of making coffee together, in the way the early sunlight was beginning to fill my apartment with golden warmth. "I don't think I want to go back to my place," he said finally, not looking at me, but speaking to his reflection in the kitchen window. The words were casual on the surface, but I could hear the weight beneath them, the careful way he was testing how they sounded in the air between us. I set down my coffee mug and turned to face him fully, my heart beating fast, but my voice steady when I spoke. "If you'll have me," he had said the night before, and now it was my turn to offer the same vulnerable honesty. "I want you to stay," I said, stepping closer to him so that we were standing only inches apart, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, close enough that I could smell the familiar scent of his skin mixed with the coffee and the morning light. He looked at me then with something that might have been wonder, as if he had been expecting rejection or hesitation and was surprised to find acceptance instead. His hand found mine again, palm to palm, fingers interlacing with the natural ease of puzzle pieces finally finding their proper fit. "Are you sure?" he asked, and there was something almost heartbreaking in the uncertainty in his voice, in the way he was still expecting this moment of connection to be temporary, still bracing himself to be disappointed. Instead of answering with words, I stepped even closer, closing the last few inches between us until our bodies were almost touching, until I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, until the space between us felt electric with possibility. "I'm sure," I whispered, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was telling the complete truth. 3 weeks later, the black duffel bag still sits by the door, though its meaning has changed entirely. What once represented temporary refuge now feels like a quiet symbol of permanence, a reminder of the night everything shifted between us. Sometimes I catch Rowan looking at it with an expression I cannot quite read, as if he is surprised to find it still there, surprised to find himself still here, surprised that choosing to stay turned out to be easier than either of us had imagined. Our lives have settled into rhythms that feel both entirely new and strangely inevitable. In the mornings, we move around each other in the kitchen with an ease that suggests we have been doing this for years rather than weeks. He makes the coffee while I prepare breakfast, our bodies unconsciously choreographed around the limitations of my small space. When he reaches around me to get a mug from the cabinet, his hand briefly touches my shoulder, a gesture so casual and natural that I sometimes forget how revolutionary it felt the first time it happened. The careful distance we once maintained has collapsed entirely, replaced by a different kind of intimacy that neither of us tries to define or analyze too closely. We sit closer together on the couch now, his leg pressed against mine as we read or watch television or simply exist in comfortable silence. When he falls asleep during movies, which happens more often now that the exhaustion and stress that brought him to my door have begun to fade, I let myself study the peaceful expression on his face, the way his breathing has become deeper and more even, the way his whole body seems to have relaxed in ways I had not realized it was tense before. We have not talked extensively about what this arrangement means or where it might lead. There have been no dramatic declarations or formal decisions about the nature of our relationship. Instead, we have let it evolve organically, each day adding small layers of intimacy and trust that build on what came before. When he reaches for my hand while we are walking down the street, I no longer analyze the gesture or wonder if it means something beyond simple affection. When I wake in the middle of the night to find him sitting on the edge of my bed, looking lost and needing comfort in ways he still cannot articulate, I make room for him without question. The transformation has not been without its moments of uncertainty. There are still nights when I catch him staring into space with that same lost expression he wore when he first arrived. Still moments when I wonder if I am reading too much into gestures that might simply be gratitude or the comfortable affection of old friendship. But these doubts feel smaller now, less threatening to the foundation we are building together. What has surprised me most is how natural this feels, how little effort it requires to incorporate another person into the carefully ordered patterns of my life. I had expected more disruption, more friction as we learned to share space that had been designed for solitude. Instead, his presence has filled gaps I had not realized existed, adding warmth and spontaneity to routines that had become almost mechanical in their predictability. We cook dinner together most evenings now, a process that involves more laughter and less efficiency than my previous approach to meal preparation. He tells me about his day while I chop vegetables, and I find myself looking forward to these conversations in ways that go beyond simple companionship. There is something profound about the mundane intimacy of domestic life shared, something that makes even the most ordinary moments feel significant. Last night, I woke from a dream I could not remember to find my bedroom filled with pale light from the street lamp outside my window. For a moment, I was disoriented, uncertain what had pulled me from sleep. Then I heard movement in the living room, the soft sound of someone shifting position on the couch, and I realized that Rowan was awake. I found him sitting up, the blanket pulled around his waist, staring toward the window with an expression that looked contemplative rather than troubled. The harsh edges that had defined his features when he first arrived had softened over the past weeks, and in the dim light, he looked younger somehow, more like the college student I had first fallen in love with than the guarded man who had knocked on my door asking for shelter. "Can't sleep?" I asked quietly, settling onto the couch beside him. He turned to look at me, and there was something in his eyes that I had learned to recognize over the past weeks, a particular quality of vulnerability that appeared when he was working through thoughts too complex or frightening to voice immediately. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice soft in the darkness, "about how different everything feels now, about how I spent so many years thinking I knew what I wanted, what would make me happy, and how wrong I was about almost everything." He reached for my hand, interlacing our fingers with the natural ease that had become second nature to both of us. The gesture was so familiar now that I barely registered it consciously, but some part of me still marveled at how right it felt, how perfectly our hands seemed designed to fit together. "Don't leave me alone," he whispered then, echoing the words that had changed everything between us, but softer now, less desperate, more like a promise than a plea. "I'm not going anywhere," I replied, and the truth of it settled around us like a benediction. We sat together in the quiet darkness, our hands joined, our breathing gradually synchronizing, Two people who had found in each other something neither had known they were looking for. Outside, the city continued its restless movement, but inside my small apartment, time seemed to slow, allowing space for the kind of peace that comes only when you finally stop running from the thing you most need. Neither of us spoke again, but we did not need to. Some truths are too large for words, too fundamental to require explanation. We simply existed together in that moment, complete and connected and no longer alone.